My last video was an overview of how I play live, the equipment I use, the approaches I take. And there's quite a few comments about some specific things that people were interested in. I thought it might be useful to show a bit of an overview of one of my sets where I talk through and kind of commentate what I'm doing. You might want to look at my previous video before watching this so you can see what the equipment is and how I've got it set up. So this is my set from the Night Cafe playing here, and I'm just going to talk you through what I'm actually doing as I go along. Starting this off, I just wanted to start out with something quite ambient. I've got a sort of textured loop from the sampler playing at the moment, which is something that I've made in VCV-Rack, and then you can just hear fading in at the moment is the Forge TME Vhikk, which I'm just adjusting there on screen. This is like a sort of textural wavetable synthesizer, and it's great for doing sort of ambient stuff. You can manipulate and build up and so on. So what you're hearing at the moment is a VCV-Rack loop, which I've created and then I've sampled and made it into a seamless loop in the sampler and the Vhikk. And you can just see there I'm starting to adjust stuff on the sequencer. That's the mixer in the top left hand corner. I've got a sequence that's playing on the Roland S-1 now, which is a polyphonic digital synth that I've got at the front there. And I've started something off on that, and I'm just slowly bringing it in on the mixer. You can see with my left hand, and then hidden behind me is the S1, and I'm bringing the filter up with that. So you can hear that's just playing like a sort of repeated chord. It's going through a delay, and I'm just changing on the mixer now how much delay it's got. And I've just changed the algorithm on the torso sequencer there, so it's now doing a bit of a chord sequence over the course of one bar. It's just shifting that up and down. You can see just bringing the filter cutoff up on the Roland there. And I'm just getting some drums ready. So I've just unmuted the kick drum with my left hand, but I've got it currently with the velocity really low. So I'm going to fade that in using the velocity. That's on the sequencer. So you can hear that sort of slowly coming in now. Building some tension by opening up the sound on the filter of the S1 while the kick's sort of slowly coming in. And I just cleared the velocity on the kick there to bring it up to the full volume. Now I'm just adding some effects from the Monsoon onto the S1. That's running on the same bus as the delay, so it's been sent into that, and I've got the pitch turned up on it, and I'm just bringing in little bits of that. I think I've hit the freeze button on that, so it's grabbed a bit of the audio from the S1 and it's just kind of looping that round, and then I can manipulate and change it a little bit. So a moment ago I started a sort of drum break loop in the sampler on the left hand side, and I'm just using the control on the stages on the left there to fade in the filter. I've got the stages sending some voltages into the sampler to control its filter. And I've just hit the filter on the Mod Dwarf to cut the low end for a second and then drop it back in. Now just bringing up the volume of the textural loop in the sampler. So on the torso there, I'm just unmuting the bass sequence, and I brought that in, kind of keeping it quite subtle at the moment because I want things to just sort of slowly build up. This is just the start of quite a long set. Plenty of time to go yet. Back when I unmuted the bass, I actually unmuted a sequence which is playing on the polycinematic, which is on the bottom right hand side of the rack. So I'm just slowly bringing that in as well now. That's a sort of another single chord, just playing a different sort of harmony to the stuff that was going already. quite tempting with the Torso's algorithms to make everything really melodic and shifting around loads. I found personally I have to sort of stay a little bit restrained and keep things on single chords, because then when you do bring in the movement, it has a lot more impact. So as you can hear there, I just muted the kick drum and the bass, and I'm just bringing in like some other drums. I'm going to drop those back in a minute. A lot of this is muting and unmuting stuff on the sequencer with my left hand there. Got that polycinematic sequence really sort of taking up all the energy now. Just adjusting the effects and giving it a bit of movement to the sound. So just bringing back in the S1 part now. It's been playing underneath quite quietly, but sort of opening up the filter to bring it through. And I just dropped the bass drum and the bass out again with the mutes on the sequencer. I'm going to bring them back in a second, but with some other parts as well. Here on the polycinematic part, I have brought in some shifts in the chords using the range algorithm on the sequencer, and then in comes the kick drums, but bring out some of the other percussion. Just tweaking the filter on the polycinematic there to give a bit of movement to the sound. So it feels like this is in sort of a bit of a second section of the set. It's not exactly tracks, but it's like the second part. We've gone from that rather more brooding kind of intro into something with a bit more melodic movement here. And now I'm just fading in a sort of sequence, a faster monophonic sequence that's playing off the Manis Iteritas. Following a similar kind of range to the chord sequence, which I will have put in the sequencer. I'm just adjusting the range there now. So I'm going to do a bit of a build up in a minute, and I'm going to low cut the whole track, there we go, in the Mod Dwarf. Increase the delay, kind of increase the drama a little bit of the sound, just adding a load of reverb onto the delay, and then I'm going to drop it back in on the mod. So I've got some like faster sequences going now with a bit more melody to them, a bit more shifting of notes and chords and stuff, which just really brings up the energy. Bringing that all back down again now by turning the filters down, turning the delay down a little bit. And I am just bringing in another part now on the sequencer, getting it all sort of set up. Definitely bringing this back down to the groove now, so that I can then go into something a bit different. So when I was playing with the sequencer, I just brought in a sequence which is playing on my Plaits oscillator and the various other bits of that synth. You can hear I'm feeding that in now, turning it up on the mixer. Brought in a bit more percussion there, just to change the energy. And after that sort of more atmospheric intro and then melodic kind of section, going into something that's a bit less sort of epic, a bit more groove based. We've got an FM synth algorithm on the Plaits there that's playing something just a little bit more rhythmic. And I'm just bringing up now the FM percussion synth on channel 1 on the mixer. So, and setting up something in the sequencer for that, we're gonna bring that in to make something a bit more rhythmic go on. Just brought out some of the drums for a minute, turned down the loop, And I'll drop it all back in a second. So much less effects on this stuff. There's a little bit of delay and reverb, but it's all a bit kind of closer, a bit kind of smaller sounding in terms of the space that it's in. Give a big contrast to what was going on before. And I'm just playing around with my left hand with the FM percussion synth. Coming in. I also triggered, you can hear some sort of vocal stuff going on in the background, just some sort of shouts and stuff. That's a loop in the sampler I've got coming into the mixer. I've just fed it into some effects. So I found with longer sets, it's really important to have some contrast, some like ups and downs, different types of energy. So this has definitely gone from that sort of more brooding intro into something that's a bit more energetic, less melodic, a bit more of a groove, which is a good contrast as we go forward. Just bring in another breakbeat loop there on the sampler, feeding it in with the filter. That main sort of part you can hear is that FM percussion synth. And what I will have done in this break, you notice most of the drums dropped out. I will be loading another setup on the sampler. If I drop everything out, I can load a totally different set of samples, including a different drum kit. So when this comes in, we've got a different drum kit playing. It's a different kick drum. It's quite similar, but it's just a bit different. And I find a lot of people end up running the same kick drum all the way through their set. I guess that gives some consistency, but I think it's nice to have some changes in the sounds. If you were doing a DJ set, you'd have different drums and stuff coming in from different records as you're playing them, so it's good to have some changes. And also for this section, which is a bit more kind of groove based, it's just good to have a slightly different drum sound to it. Okay, so I've got the percussion running into the Monsoon multi-effect, well, kind of granular effect now, and I'm just using that to bring in some pitched versions of it, feeding back, just adding some variation to the same part that's playing. And sometimes I find it's tempting to just come up with a new part and go from one part to another, but it's good to add variation by just playing around with what's there, adding effects, bringing them out, messing with the synth sound. Then you get a sort of some consistency, but you've also got some change going on and something that's interesting. Just going to bring in some other bits of drums there. On the sequencer, I'm muting and unmuting some things. And actually here you can see I'm just sort of setting up a new part. So I've selected a part and I'm putting in some pulses. I'm putting in some of them manually there, I think, rather than using the algorithms in the sequencer. Setting up a new thing to play something different while this is kind of just rolling away. So you can't hear that part playing yet, but I'll bring it in a minute as like the next section of this. Just hear a textural sort of chord loop that's in the sampler there, which is nice for a different atmosphere for this sort of little breakdown bit. And then we got another contrast here. It's gone from being quite groove based to a little bit more floaty. Fading that atmospheric textural loop out with the filter on the sampler, and I'm doing the same on the break there. Just really focusing down now on the core bit, get rid of that floaty atmosphere, back to the groove. Still playing around with the Monsoon, just shortening the grains of what it's playing. And you can't actually see this, but with my right hand there, I'm just bringing in the Vhikk X now, the sort of atmospheric wavetable synth that's on the desk. So I'm blocking that by standing in front of it. But That's going to give a bit of a rolling kind of atmosphere. Instead of that very floaty atmosphere we had from the sampled loop, this one will be a bit more gnarly. Going into something definitely more atonal here. Just brought in some open hi-hats just to up the energy a little bit there. Bringing in all the drum stuff, it's just a case of like muting and unmuting it with the sequencer, or adding the pulses in to trigger the drum sounds in the sequencer. All the bottom row of channels on the sequencer there is all drums basically. Just brought some drums out there, and I'm probably going to bring in another part. I'm just bringing that in with both the mixer and the filter. This is the part on the Plaits channel, and this is what I was preparing earlier on the sequencer, I think, when things were just grooving away. So I sort of created that. I can't hear what I'm doing when I'm creating it, so I need to think quite carefully about what I'm putting in the sequencer. Luckily it's got this kind of scale mode, so it all gets locked to scale, but it's a case of kind of understanding what the algorithms in the sequencer are doing so you can bring in something with the right feel. And you can hear that coming in now. So I've changed the Plaits. The Plaits was running an FM sort of sound before, but it's now running a bit more of a like virtual analog sound, something a bit more melodic. It's only playing a bit of an arpeggio there, so I've used the range control in the T1 for it to shift like bar by bar. So I must have been thinking here, we've had quite a lot of more atonal, more groove-based stuff for a while, so let's get something a bit more melodic now to change the atmosphere, make it a bit different. I'm going to be opening up the filter on that and just trying to create a bit more tension before dropping the drums back in. I've just dropped some hi-hats and claps in, but no kicks or bass just yet. Before I drop the bass in, I think I'm just changing what's going on in the sequencer for the bass. I found it's quite easy to keep the same bass line running along for ages and ages, so I'll just be switching that up so when it comes back in, it's playing something different to what it was before. Bringing in a line here, a high frequency line from the Manis Iteritas. Very, very simple, just a couple of notes back and forth, but it's just to add kind of something else going on a bit higher up in the frequencies. And I just changed the range control on the sequencer on the T1 there. So this is starting to play something that's a little bit more notes ranging around. Shifted it again there, so it's following more of a sort of arpeggio across different chords. And we've fully gone now from that atonal kind of groove-based stuff to something a bit more melodic. This is all sequences that I've just come up with on the fly. I brought the bass back in there. I'm opening up the filter on the bass to make it a bit more prominent, a bit more of a feature. And that's something I don't do very often, which is to mute loads of stuff and just have it drop down to something really much more simple. Just the kick and the bass and the hi-hat there. You can hear that we've got a drum break running in the sampler as well that I just triggered, but the filter on that's really, really low. I'm probably going to bring that in slowly now. So often it's really good to have like quite slow transitions, doing things really slowly, but sometimes there's again a bit of a contrast. You can just drop loads of stuff out and totally change stuff, then that can be another different way of transitioning from one thing to another. You can hear I've got a vocal there that's in the sampler. This is quite a long vocal that I edited up from a really old sample to just run over the top of a groove and make a different type of track. Rather than being driven by synths and melodies, it can be driven by this sort of slightly weird atmospheric vocal. I'm probably thinking this is okay, but it's sounding quite sparse. It's going to need to have something else coming in, so I'm just setting up a sound there on the S1, the Roland S-1 synth. Here we go, these kind of dubby sort of chords coming in slowly here. Just adjusting the delay on those. And I've just changed them in the sequencer, so rather than playing chords, they're playing some individual notes. So it's all still feeling quite sparse, but I'm just messing around with the sequencer, and in a moment I'm going to change up the pattern that the S1 synth is playing to make it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more of a hook rather than just a sort of backing atmosphere. I just added in some more notes onto the sequencer there, and now what it's playing has changed around. So that module in the top right, which my right hand is sort of on a lot of the time, is the mixer. So I'm just constantly just changing how much effects each different part has, maybe adjusting the volumes a little bit, bringing things in and out with the volumes there. It's one of the most used things in my rack. There's quite a quiet part playing there in the Plaits, which I'm just going to be bringing up in the mix now. I've deliberately made a sequence in the sequencer which is driving the Plaits, which is a bit faster, and also put lots of delay on it, so I'm just trying to really bring up the energy at this point. Things have been quite sparse for a while. I'm going to add some more stuff going on. Taking the vocal out at this point. I think there's kind of been enough of that, and plus the synths are kind of driving the sound now at this point anyway, so it doesn't really need that. Just adjusting the filter on the Plaits. I've got a little bit of modulation running into the Plaits from LFOs in the stages, so that's just shifting the sound a little bit as it goes, but it's good to just be tweaking stuff all the time really, because some of the raw synth sounds can sound quite powerful but can get stale pretty quickly, so it's just good to have things just shifting, even if just a little bit adds to the sort of detail of the sound. Now I'm messing around with the effects. I just pressed the hold, then the sort of freeze function on the delay, which sounded a bit weird and out of time, so I quite quickly turned it off, but just tried to use it as a fill. what I did then was I've got a pattern set up in the T1. I've switched over to that. This is, having just made up lots of stuff on the fly, I'm switching over to a kind of pre-made pattern that's got a couple of synth lines that from sort of tracks that I've made before in it. And I'm just bringing that in here on the Plaits. So as I switched to the new pattern, lots of things were muted, so it's just muted all the drums and stuff. And then we're going to go into this new sequence that I already had saved. I don't often do this. Usually I might have something set up in the sequencer to start me off, and then I'll just sort of improvise and come up with things on the fly. But in this particular performance, I wanted to play, there's a couple of things that I'd sort of pre-made that I wanted to play. There's no like preset arrangement or anything here. I'm still arranging it on the fly, but it's got the sequences that I already came up with. It's really like this kind of Tangerine Dream style sequence here, so bringing that in. And so we've gone from a section that was sort of relatively groove driven to something that's a bit more kind of melodic and stuff. See, I brought in the kick, but just on the kind of the 1 and the 3. And there we go, I've just, with the sequencer, just dropped that back in on the 4/4. Just brought the energy back up. Just using the harmonics knob on the Plaits there to bring in this harmony on one of the oscillators. This model's got 2 oscillators, and they were just running at the same pitch, but this has shifted one of them up. Quite like with this running sequence to just mess with the harmonics on the Plaits. Again, this is an example of something where instead of bringing in something new, I'm just keeping the same thing running, but shifting it and changing it to keep it interesting. So I've got another sequence in here on the polycinematic, which is playing kind of some chords that fit with this sequence. So you can see that module flashing there because I've unmuted it. I'm just slowly bringing it in with the filter and the volume, whilst bringing the filter down on the Plaits. So one of them's kind of replacing the other. So I'm able to change things up quite quickly here because I dropped into another pattern that already had a bunch of sequences set up in it. And that's the polycinematic that you're hearing there with the chords. So I just triggered off a break in the sampler, in the Bitbox sampler, and I'm just bringing that in now slowly using the filter. I'm going to drop the drums back in with the mutes on the sequencer in a second. There we go, that's the drums and the bass in. I'm going to bring the chords back down with the filter and then bring that main sequence back in. That's another thing that I've learned actually. I find it quite tempting to sort of play a part, explore it a bit, and then get rid of it and go on to something else. But if you think about a track that you might be producing, you'd probably be likely to have kind of a chorus or an A section and a B section and go back and forth between them. So it's quite good to be able to go off in a direction and then come back to the hook that you had before, especially if you've got like a good hook. Think of it a little bit like sort of a verse and a chorus of a track, although it's more of an A and a B, maybe a C section. So that main Plaits riff I had running into the effects, and I've frozen the Monsoon here. Just gives us quite a nice atmospheric thing in the background. I'm not turning it up too loud, but I've changed the range algorithm on the sequencer on those chords now, so they're just playing the same chord repeatedly. And my polycinematic's running into an FX aid, which has got a sort of sample rate reduction setting in it at the moment. So I'm just shifting the sound by downsampling it. Polycinematic's really great, but it does a certain set of sounds, so it's really nice to have an effects processor in line, so it just gives you a whole bigger palette of sounds that it can make. Just turning the sample rate kind of up and down to just add some changes in there. While that was going on, I was just messing around in the sequencer with setting up another on-the-fly kind of sequence for the Manis Iteritas. I've switched that into a different mode now, so it sounds a little bit different to how it did before. But that's the lead sort of sound that you can hear coming in here, is that Manis Iteritas. Drop the drums out while I bring that in for a bit more drama. I've just brought in a bit of a texture on the sampler there as well. Something quite minimal, but it's nice to have some like background detail. That's just a loop of some sort of odd noises that I made in Vhkk. Going into something a bit darker here. Balancing various volumes on the mixer there. And I'm going to unmute some drums and just bring a bit more energy back to it. I think the sort of darkness of the synth line made me think something a bit more minimal in the drums would work well here. And I'm just bringing in that Vhikk X now. I've probably switched that onto a different algorithm, get slightly different sound. Just faded it in for some like sort of crunchy background sounds. You can hear there I've got a sidechain running on the Vhikk X. It does some pretty strange drony stuff, so it's good to just sort of chop it up with the volume with the sidechain so that sounds vaguely in time with what you're doing. And now I'm bringing back in that polycinematic running through that sample rate reduction effect. You might have seen there on the desk the timer. They actually set up a timer on the night cafe for these sets, but I also brought my own kind of kitchen timer. It's so hard to keep track of time when you're playing live. You're thinking about so many things. So I found it's pretty important to have some kind of really visible timer on there. I found even looking at my watch isn't enough. I need a kind of neon display there. Anyway, just change the range algorithm on the sequencer there to bring in some shifting of the chords, and we're going into something a bit more kind of atmospheric, a little bit more epic again. And then I shifted it back to just one chord. That's something I found as well, just like shifting the sequence as much as possible as well is quite good for keeping the interest. So this loop that's going at the moment where it's shifting is quite nice, but it's going to get repetitive. So switch it back to the single chords, change around what it's doing. It just keeps everything evolving. Still got that quiet Monsoon kind of part going in the background, just keeps a bit of texture going. Obviously dropped the drums out now, and I'm just bringing in the Manis Iteritas, and I've changed around the sequence that it was playing. As it comes in, you might hear that there's some similarities with the previous sequence. I've just kind of evolved it and changed it when it was turned down and you couldn't hear it. A bit like I was saying before, having different sections going back and forth between them, so the sort of A section, B section. This is the same thing, but I've just tweaked it a little bit to make it a bit different. I'm just messing around there with the Roland S-1. Can't hear it at the moment. I'm just getting it kind of set up and ready to slowly bring it in with a new sequence. There you go, coming in now with that kind of stabby chord sound. Just broken down everything else. Felt like before that melody, it could have gone really big and come in as a big kind of crescendo or something, but I think sometimes with this kind of progressive music, having the tension of stuff sort of kind of coming in but then drifting out and doing something else keeps it interesting. And on the sequencer there, I'm just adding in some extra notes so that it's not just a single note, it's now a stabbing kind of chord sound. Shifting the atmosphere into something a bit different. We had that quite spacey, melodic-y sort of sound before. It's going into something a bit more ravey. Just feeding it into the Monsoon to make some sort of interesting variations on that quite simple sound. I'm just tweaking the bass sound there as well. Bring the kick back in whilst dropping the sort of weird out of time effects. Just take it back to a groove. Just playing around on the sequencer there, adding in more notes to add more harmonies to that chord. Something I've been working on a bit recently is like evolving the sequences while they're playing, kind of adding in extra notes, changing the range of them. Not just, I think for a while I was varying stuff by varying the sounds a lot, but varying the sequences can be just as interesting and adds another way of evolving things and changing them around. So I've used the range algorithm there to make that shift across different chords slightly. And there's sort of quite a simple sequence that the Plaits is playing just to sort of complement it. Those kind of single notes. Often works quite well to have something that's more of a hook, more complex, and then something really simple in the background just to back it up. And I've just brought back in the percussion synth there. I'd messed around with the sequence when it wasn't playing. I guess I thought this rave melody kind of, it'd be good to have kind of a bit of a groove and some more atonal sounds running with it. So now I'm just tweaking that, just evolving it, running it into the Monsoon. A little bit weird, a little bit out of time there, but that's okay for a short bit. There's a bit of a kind of fill. Still hear that S1 just grooving away in the background nice and quietly. Sometimes I've found it's quite good to leave things low down in the mix like that. But I'll bring it back in now, I think. threw in a bit of an odd chord there with the sequencer, but you know, doesn't matter. Adds a bit of variation. Adds to the liveness sometimes, having some things that are a bit more spontaneous. I've got in my head probably at this point what kind of a track this is. It's more of a groove-based thing with tension coming up and down. So I'm going to be bringing the different parts in and out, building the tension up and then dropping it down. To this point as well, we're getting on for about 3/4 of the way through the set, so I'm going to be thinking about where I'm going. This is a nice place to be at this point. We've had various different atmospheres going through. This is something with a bit of tension, but not too sort of epic or melodic. I'll be thinking that I want to go more in a melodic kind of direction towards the end of the set, make things a bit more kind of memorable. So yeah, I've also got a particular track set up in patterns that I want to finish on, so I'll be thinking about where to go there at this point. What am I going to do to bring things in? In here we've got some different drums going on here. I loaded up a different drum kit in the sampler while the drums were out a little bit earlier on. From that kind of ravey sound now into something that's a little bit more sort of atmospheric. And I've switched up the bass line so it's playing that kind of chugging 16ths. Yeah, a different kind of rolling rhythm going on with, you can hear some sort of spacey atmospheric sounds. That's one of my Vhkk loops coming out of the sampler. Quite a minimal one, but it's nice to have some that just drift around underneath. Hypnotic now. Tweaking around with the sequencer there, I'm obviously changing some of the sequences on the things that aren't playing. Just messing around with the bass synth as well, tweak the sound on that a little bit. This feels like one of those moments where there's a nice rolling groove. I've got a little bit of time to figure out what I'm doing next, set some things up, create some new sequences, ready for the next bit. But you've got to keep it moving as well, so I just dropped out the kick drum there. Got some percussion sounds in the FM percussion synth, just firing into that delay. It can be easy to get caught up with doing all the background stuff and then not making any or many changes. Now I think at this point I ran into a couple of problems because the bass synth started not responding in quite the way that I wanted, or at all at one point. So there was a bit of messing around trying to figure out what was going on. I never really did figure out what was going on, but one thing I did was drop in the Plaits to be playing the sort of low bass line for a while. You can see that flashing red light is the envelope on the Plaits synth being triggered. And I'm sort of bringing that in. I just brought it up by accident into the high range you might have heard there. I'm going to bring it down and get that playing some bass. Partly because the bass synth just doesn't seem to be working properly. Never figured out what that problem was, but sometimes things don't work as intended. It's good to be able to work around them. That's one of the reasons for having like quite a few different synths actually as well, is that you can bring in different ones. I've mainly been using the analog synth voice for bass, but I would like to work in the future on varying up the bass lines a little bit, maybe getting some FM bass sounds coming out of that Plaits, switching them around. There we go, we got that kind of synth loop from the sampler just kind of carrying the atmosphere there, got the hypnotic groove going. Tweaking the synths just to add a little bit of interest to the sound. Okay, so I've tweaked on the sequencer what the polycinematic chords were playing, and I'm just going to slowly, subtly bring those in, a little bit with the volume and a little bit with the changing the filter. That background synth loop's complementing this really nicely. I've got a whole bunch of those loops that I've rendered off in different keys and scales so that I can use them depending on what key I'm playing in. So sometimes you get some melodic bits that just complement it really nicely. Okay, now I'm bringing in the Manis Iteritas. There's another sequence that I was tweaking in the background just before, coming up with something new, so this sequence just totally on the fly. And obviously I'm hearing this for the first time, same as you, and it's coming back in sounding like a really nice melody, so that's going to take me in a different direction towards that more kind of melodic direction that I was talking about needing to go in. I'll have had some idea that's where it's going, because when I program the sequence I'm giving it a bunch of notes to play with and arrange, but it's probably come in as a slight surprise that it sounds like such a nice melody. About melodies, weirdly, is that the more complicated melodies can get a bit tiresome more quickly, I find. If you've got something just playing like a rhythmic kind of one chord kind of thing, it can get really hypnotic. A melody can be great, but then it can get really repetitive if you just let it playing for ages, so you need to bring it in and out and get different things going on. Changing the sample rate on that effects there on the polycinematic chords to just take the crunch out of them, make them more melodic and complement this breakdown. So I'm just bringing in more delay and trying to like up the energy there. Come out of this breakdown, be able to drop the drums and bring the groove back in. Add lots of delay, add a bit of the Monsoon effect, granular effect. But yeah, rather than building it up into something massive then, I went for kind of bringing it down and then dropping the groove back in. Just constantly balancing levels there as ever on the mixer. Really opening up that filter on the Manis Iteritas, like bring that melody to the forefront, make this the main kind of crescendo of this bit. And then I'm bringing that down at the same time as I've got a kind of a chord sound coming back in now, coming in, which is going to be the place where I'm going to go to next. So I'm kind of looking to, if this was a bunch of tracks, like I'm moving on to the next track here. That's enough of that melody and stuff. Bring it down, to bring up this new chord thing. Go into something else. We've got quite a lot of energy with all the percussion and stuff, which is a good place to be at this point in the set. We've got about 10 minutes to go, so this wants to be the highest energy point really. I'm going to try and move from that melodic bit into whatever's coming next fairly quickly. I don't want to go too up and down at this point. on the polycinematic there. I think here, unusually, I've got a monophonic sequence playing on a polycinematic. I mean, it's one of the few polyphonic things that I've got, so usually I'm focusing on using that for chords, but sometimes it's nice to have something a bit different going. Just hear a little bit of that sample rate reduction on there, but I've tweaked the sounds on it, so it sounds like a different part. Playing quite a short kind of rolling sequence to complement those chords. And I've switched those chords in the sequencer to just be playing one chord for a bit. Just get that variation in there. And then I just brought the range back in on the chords, so you've got that shift going again. Again, just trying to get variation in the sequence as well as the actual sound. Bring some ride cymbals in, keep the energy up. And I've not got too long left, so I'm going to be thinking now about this track that I want to go into for the ending. I've got another pattern on the sequencer already set up for that. It's a track that I've kind of played and jammed before. So I'm going to be thinking about how I can go into that. I think with this, that's quite a hypnotic track. This is quite a high energy thing, so I'm probably going to just like drop into it quite quickly and really change things up. I've had quite a while of the energy sort of building and building now. So there we go, I just dropped that into the other pattern. Kept the drums kind of running with some energy and then just totally switched over into something else. I have to admit, I actually switched into that with the wrong melody playing, or at least not the one I was planning for. So this kind of high sequence here wasn't really what I was aiming for here. But here we go, we're into the other pattern now, and this is a track that was one of the first things I came up with actually when I was jamming with this system when I first got the torso sequencer. A bit kind of hypnotic, a bit of a change of pace for this kind of final section of the set. So we've got a lead line running on the Manis Iteritas there, that's kind of hypnotic thing with lots of delay on it. And then we've got the bass synth playing that other lower part. Messing with the delay, kind of bringing a bit of different energy to it. Bring the drums back in. Had a bit of a breakdown there, but want to keep the energy up because it's going to be the last few minutes of the set. Just tweaking the bass synth there and sort of come back in. As I said earlier, something went a bit wrong with that synth at one point, but it seems to be back now, so carry on with it. And I'm just tweaking the Plaits now, bringing in a sequence on that, slowly turning up the volume, adding a bit of effects to it so it doesn't come in totally dry. Drop the bass and the kick out just for a second and then bring in that ride cymbal, keep the energy going. I have to say, in some ways I thought it would be easier having a preset sequence and dropping into it for a track, but sometimes it's actually harder than just evolving and coming up with things on the fly, because it's quite hard to remember where everything is. You switch a pattern and suddenly all of your channels are doing something different and you have to figure that out and keep on top of it. Now, I I know this one really well because I played it quite a few times, but I actually find that a lot of the time evolving things and just coming up with them as I go is easier to keep track of with this kind of system. You can hear that sort of high-end thing now. That's the Monsoon. It's got the pitch shifted up on it, and it's running that main sequence into it with the aux send on the mixer. Cinematic chords now. Just tweaked their sound while they were down to make them a bit more of a kind of bit more of an epic kind of detuned chord sound. I don't know if you could hear that there, but just quietly in the background I brought in a break, but it really didn't sound quite right with everything, so I did kind of just drop it out again. I'll carry on with the drums this way, bring those chords in. Those chords really going, and like everything's kind of running in this track, so I'm gonna be just keep adding a bit of movement to it whilst thinking about where I'm gonna go next. I haven't got too long left. I want to kind of round things off, finish them off in some kind of way, probably kind of bring the energy down and go into some kind of ambience to finish things off. Just sort of letting this run and keeping it moving a little bit. Out all the drums in a second. I just dropped out the kick drum, just getting ready to drop out the bass. And just on the volume, bringing in that main melody on the Manis Iteritas again. Just muted all the drums on the sequencer there. And I've got the Vhikk X coming up in the background there, just for a bit of background sounds, keep things interesting as I slowly break everything down. It's often nice, even if you're trying to like remove things, to add something else in as well to keep it interesting. Like even if with the drums, if you're going to take a ride cymbal out and drop the energy, it's good to like bring in maybe a quiet shaker at the same time so it doesn't just really drop out. Okay, so this is really breaking down now. I'm bringing in a sort of ambient textural loop off the sampler, sort of droning chord kind of thing. The Vhikk X running in the background, and I'm just going to slowly like turn down the filters on stuff, turn down the volumes on stuff, and just break it down into sort of fading away ending. Dropped out the bass there. Now we're just left hearing that loop from the sampler and the Vhikk X. A wavetable synth drone to finish things on. So that was the set. I hope that was useful, talking through what I was doing, trying to remember what I'm doing some of the time. It's very much kind of going with the flow. It's a mixture of going with the flow and having like a bigger plan for what direction things are going to go in. Thinking about where you are, but where you are going to go next, where you want to get to by the end of it, following the energy and the ideas sometimes, but sometimes changing it up. Bit of a mixture this set between, had a few patterns prepared at the start, went into improvising. About halfway through I threw in a sort of pre-prepared track, and when it's pre-prepared it's just some looped sequences really. I'm still arranging it all live and sound designing it and stuff. Then off into some improvised, more melodic, hypnotic stuff, and then rounding off with that kind of existing track at the end, and into some weird ambience. So yeah, let me know if you've got any questions, any other things you'd like me to cover on this. I am looking at doing another more in-depth video on the sequencer on its own and how I use that, because that's really key, as you can see. And I hope you found that useful. Thanks.